Okay, thank you for coming. My name is Wilkie, and I'm a portrait painter. In a previous life, I worked as an animator for 25 years. I started at Walt Disney Feature Animation as assistant animator, and I returned to portrait painting after working as a supervising director at Netflix. And in between those two gigs, I made a whole lot of bad decisions. Now today, I'm going to tell you a story while I paint a picture based on that story. Actually, I've already painted the picture, and so I'm going to show you a video of that painting being painted while I tell you the story. So as I talk, you can literally watch paint dry. So today's story is The Gift of the Magi, and it was written by O. Henry in the year 1900. This is my version of the story. I had to make some changes to fit this format, and because I'm too lazy to memorize it word for word. This is a popular story. I'm sure some of you have heard it. Please don't ruin it for everybody else. Don't be yelling out, "Luke, he's your father!" For those of you who don't know, a Magi is not a K-pop band. The Magi are the wise men from the Bible. And they followed a star, led them to Bethlehem and to the manger where baby Jesus was. And they're important to this story because they're the ones who started the tradition of giving gifts on Christmas. But back then they didn't call it Christmas. They just called it Tuesday. And they brought frankincense and myrrh and gold. And I'm not real sure what frankincense and myrrh are, but gold was used as money back then. So you could say that the wise men also started the tradition of giving cash as presents, which is something my girlfriend hates. So that's it for the wise men. The rest of the story is about a couple named Della and Jim. And they lived in the year 1900 in New York in a small apartment, in a dinky little apartment. And the story takes place on Christmas Eve. Now Della wants to buy a special present for Jim. You see, Jim has this pocket watch that used to be his grandfather's pocket watch, and so it has sentimental value. And his grandfather had handed it down to Jim's father, who handed it down to him, and it reminds Jim of his time on his grandfather's farm, helping him pick beets and shuck corn and tip cows. And the problem with the pocket watch is that Jim has a leather strap attached to it that he attaches the watch to his belt so it doesn't get lost. The strap is old and frayed and stained, and Jim's embarrassed by this. So whenever he pulls his pocket watch out to check the time, he always tries to hide it. And so Della wants to buy him a silver chain for the pocket watch. Her problem is that she doesn't have money. They're not dirt poor. They do have an apartment and they do have enough money for food most of the time. So you could say that they were dirt poor adjacent. What Della does have, though, is beautiful long hair. And we know it's beautiful long hair because when people see it, they say, "That's beautiful long hair." And Della loves it when people compliment her on her hair. She loves that Jim loves her long hair. She loves it when Jim brushes out her long hair. So she figures she'll chop her hair off and sell it. And so she goes to the local wig maker, and the wig maker cuts her hair off. And but Della is afraid the wig maker cut too much of her hair off. It's way too short. But she gets her money and she heads off to a jewelry store to buy the chain she's looking for. She has to hit several jewelers, and she finds the one she wants, and she negotiates with the jeweler and gets a good price. And then she heads off to a market to buy food for Christmas Eve dinner. And she buys pork chops and cruciferous vegetables and Hot Pockets. And then she heads home. And when she walks into the house, she catches her reflection in the mirror. And she's horrified to see how short her hair is. So she curls it and tries to make it look as nice as she can. And then she wraps Jim's present, the watch chain, inside of some old paper she had around. She couldn't afford nice wrapping paper. And she had some old twine, so she used that to tie it up and made a nice bow. And then she started preparing dinner. And it's about this time that Jim walked into the house, or the apartment. And he looks at her and he freezes and just stares at her. And she thinks, oh my God, he hates my short hair. And she says, yeah, I had to cut my hair to get some money to buy you a Christmas present and buy you nice food for dinner. And Jim kind of looks around the apartment. She says, silly, the hair's gone. I sold it to the wig maker. Would you like me to start cooking dinner? And Jim just keeps staring at her and she thinks, oh my God, he hates my short hair. He's going to end up dumping me for some long-haired hussy. And so she figures she'll give him his Christmas present. So she hands the present to him and he opens it up and sees the chain and he just collapses onto the couch. And she thinks all the bad thoughts. She thinks, my God, he's been planning on leaving me all alone. Why did he wait to do this on Christmas Eve? That monster. And then Jim reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a present for her. And she unwraps it, and inside is a set of decorative combs to either hold back or hold up her beautiful long hair. And then Jim says, I sold my pocket watch to buy you those combs. So now Della has decorative combs for her beautiful long hair, and Jim has a silver pocket watch chain for the pocket watch he no longer has. And the point of the story is that love is not about the gifts that we give each other. It's about the sacrifices that we make for each other. So as you can see, the painting is not finished drying yet. So I'm going to tell you an additional story that's equally as compelling as the gift of the Magi. And that is the story of my life. I was born and raised in Southern California, not far from the beaches. And to the horror of most people, I have never been surfing. When I was 8, we moved to Simi Valley. And my mother enrolled my brother and me in park and recreation art classes. And we learned oil painting and pastels and watercolor painting, and I absolutely hated it. The classes were on Saturday mornings, and this is when all my favorite cartoons were playing. And this is long before streaming or DVRs or even VHS tapes. So if you weren't sitting in front of the TV when your show came on, you just didn't see it. It was really primitive. Before I was born, my father had had a job as a carpenter. So he had a bunch of tools in the garage and scraps of wood lying around. And he taught me how to use his tools, but he didn't like me using his things. So if I wanted to use his tools, I had to be sneaky and make sure I cleaned them afterwards and put them back where they belonged, which wasn't difficult because he was that guy who had the pegboard in the garage with all the tools outlined. He was a little anal retentive. But when he wasn't around, I would use the tools. I would take the scraps of wood, mix and match them, and then I would hammer them together, nail them together, and I painted them with watercolors, and I made a bunch of abstract sculptures this way. And then one day I installed them all in my mother's rose garden. And my parents tried to be encouraging. Well, at least my mother did. She said, well, those are nice. My dad said, what are they supposed to be? Are they finished? Hey, you've been using my tools. Years would go by, and my father went into rehab for alcoholism. And one of the nurses pulled my brother and me aside and told us that the children of alcoholics are 4 times more likely to become alcoholics, and that we should keep an eye on our drinking. Which is a good thing, because I really love that feeling of, alcohol running through me, running through my veins, the warmth of it going down my throat and hitting my stomach. And then there's that pivot when the whole world just stops mattering and I don't care about anything. Anyways, years would go by and my father would tell me that he used to hide his scotch in the garage and that whenever he went out there to tinker, it was to drink. And he didn't want me touching his tools because he was afraid I would find his stash of scotch, which ironically is how he got started drinking. So when I turned 17, I got my driver's license. And my father offered to let me drive his car for 2 weeks while he was on a business trip to Alaska and Hawaii. And the only stipulation was that I had to fill the car full of gas and wash it and wax it just before he got back. So that's fine. Now the car was a Lincoln Continental Mark IV. It was white. And this thing was a boat. It was huge. And steering was, you would turn, it was like steering an aircraft carrier. You would turn the wheel and then it would slowly come about. And then you turn the wheel and slowly come about. And I hated the steering. Even back then, I had an attitude about cars. And the car was brand new. And even though my father smoked, he refused to smoke in the car, so it still had that new car smell. So let's see a show of hands of everybody who has figured out what's about to happen. So me and 3 friends hop in the car and we head off to a pool party in Huntington Beach. And it's the middle of the day, beautiful cloudy day, and we immediately get lost. And the only map I had was this crummy little thing that somebody had drawn for me to help me get there. It was confusing. And I'm looking at this map and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And when I look up, we're heading through a 4-way stop and I T-boned some lady in a small orange car and wrecked my dad's brand new car and totaled her car. And I knew it was totaled because both front wheels were bent out like that. And even then I knew that was a bad sign. And sent her to the emergency room. She ended up being okay. I called her a couple of weeks later to see how she was doing and apologize. And she had cut her forehead in the accident, and so there was a lot of blood, and it looked a lot worse than it was. And when she went to the emergency room, they stitched her up and then sent her home. Because evidently in the 1970s, that's how you treated a head injury. So we didn't know what hotel my father was staying in. And so we had to wait for him to call us. And so a couple of days before he was due back, he calls. And he says, "Hey, how's the car? Is it all gassed up and waxed and ready to go?" And I said, "Sorry, Dad, I wrecked your car." And he said, "Ha ha ha ha, you're so funny, you big joker, you." And I said, "No, Dad, seriously, I wrecked your car. It's in the shop. It's being worked on, but it's not going to be finished for a couple of weeks." And he handled it pretty well, which was surprising. Until about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the phone rings, and I hear my mother's side of the story, or conversation, and she says, "No, Robert, no, no. Robert, you're drunk. Go to bed, Robert, you're drunk. No, leave the bar and go to bed." So that was fun. I kind of wish he would have just yelled at me. Anyways, 2 weeks go by, and a buddy of mine calls and says, "Hey, I know of this sorority party in Newport Beach. Do you want to go?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, sure." So we hop in his car and we get to this party. It's on the 2nd floor in an apartment building, and the music is blaring and people are yelling over the music, trying to talk and dancing, and the apartment was just packed. And we both need to use the restroom. So we work our way through the crowd, and he goes into the restroom and pees and comes out, and I go in the restroom and I pee, and as I'm walking out of the restroom, the cops are coming in the front door of the apartment. and they arrest everybody who was underage for being at a party where alcohol was being served without adult supervision. So, needless to say, I now hate parties. And I hate beach towns, which is difficult because I live in a beach town. I live in Santa Barbara. So they packed us all into a sardine can that was masquerading as a paddy wagon, and there was 30 of us, and they take us to Newport Beach Jail, hitting every bump and pothole on the way there. And they booked us all, and then my mom got to come pick me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that was the longest, quietest ride of my life. I almost wish that she would have yelled at me instead. So 2 months go by. The summer of my 17th year was a difficult year. So I have to go to juvie court for running the stoplight. Being at a party where alcohol was being served, they dropped the charges. They dropped the charges on everybody. And so most people don't know this, but juvie court isn't in a big courtroom like you see on TV, or if you ever go to jury duty, or if you've ever been in a courtroom. Maybe some of you are felons, I don't know. But it's just an office. I was actually surprised, a small office, and fairly dark. And there's just a judge with a tape recorder. He didn't even have a stenographer in there. And I'm wearing a suit and a tie, so as not to look like a total delinquent. And we go walking in, and I reach out to shake the judge's hand, and I did not realize it, but the judge's desk was up on a platform about 8 to 10 inches high. And I hit that thing and tripped and fell forward and did a face plant. Boom, right onto his desk. And I'm flailing around, and I couldn't get my footing because I kept tripping on that stupid step. And my dad grabs me by the jacket and pulls me up and sets me down. And then the two of them started negotiating my future. And I did the thing that I'm best at, and that's daydreaming. And I'm sitting there and I think, you know what? I want to be an artist. I want to paint. And so I started taking all the art classes that the counselors would let me take in high school. And when I got to college, I pretty much only took art classes. And I didn't go to any big college. I just went to Long Beach City College. And I tried making it as a fine artist and did a lot of floundering and dropped out of college and floundered some more and went back to college and dropped out of college and floundered. And excuse me. I ended up painting abstracts in a construction trailer in Joshua Tree, California, which is the desert. It's desert. And battling with the coyotes and the rattlesnakes and the scorpions. I found 13 scorpions inside the house. You don't get much more white trash than that. The one night, in the middle of the night, I got up and used the restroom. A lot of peace stories in this narrative. And when I came back to the bed, I noticed something dark in the bed. So I turned on the light, and there, where I'd just been sleeping, is a scorpion. Now, these scorpions were black, and they were about 1 inch or 2 long. And I'd never been stung by one, but I understand it was like getting stung by a bee. And this one was splayed out on the bed and dead. So I'd like rolled over on it in the middle of the night and suffocated it. So I picked this thing up, and I'm sitting there staring at this dead scorpion, and I think, I need to get a job where I can sit in a cubicle and draw. And it was about this time that Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Simpsons had become huge hits. And so I went back to college, and I started taking any animation class I could. And it took me about 1.5 years, and I was able to get a job as an assistant animator at Walt Disney Feature Animation. And I worked on Pocahontas, Hunchback, and Hercules. And I had worked in a grocery store, and from the minute we punched in, the bosses were yelling at us to work faster and move faster and get more work done. They basically badgered a work ethic into me. And so when I showed up at Disney, I got there early and they had all my pencils all sharpened and ready to go. But my first day at Disney was the Monday after the Lion King's opening weekend that broke all the box office records. It even beat all the live action movies up to that point. So Jaws and Jurassic Park and Star Wars. Well, the first Star Wars, the first Jaws, the first Jurassic Park. And so everybody in the studio was out of their minds happy. And I was happy for them. But it was kind of weird because I had nothing to do with the movie. And I tried to get them to give me work, give me something to do. But they would just say, don't worry about it. Here, have a glass of champagne. Every time I went back to my desk, there would be some sort of gift. A toy or a t-shirt or a poster. And the problem was that I never saw the people who were dropping them off. So they knew I wasn't at my desk. They knew I wasn't getting any work done. And I started getting paranoid because this went on for an entire week. An entire week of nothing but champagne and cake. And by the way, champagne and cake is a horrible pairing. But I started to think, oh my God, somebody's going to find out I haven't done any work and I'm going to get fired before I get started. But the thing is that Walt Disney Feature Animation in the 1990s really was the happiest place on earth. And I had a lot of fun working there, and I got to work with some absolutely amazing artists. So that was my first day at Disney. Now I'm going to tell you about my first day working in the grocery business, to give you a little contrast. I started at Disney in my mid-30s. And working in the grocery store, I was 19. And I got this job because I was in college, the first time I was in college, for money for art supplies and food. And, you know, art supplies even back then were like ridiculously expensive. So I had previously worked in a drugstore, so I understood the retail drill. And I bought myself new shoes, black leather shoes. And the store hired me to be a box boy for the grand opening of the store. So it was really important that I had brand new shoes to bag groceries. And it was the middle of the summer and it was hot in the middle of the day. And the parking lot was packed. And I walked up to the front of the store and the doors opened up. And standing there in front of me is this toddler, this cute little cherub of a child. He has this big grin on his face, and he has his arms out as if to welcome me into my new job working in the grocery business. The thing is that this kid had his pants down around his ankles, and he was peeing, and he started swinging back and forth, and pee started shooting out like a rainbird sprinkler, and he got pee on my shoes, and I jumped back and I was horrified. Like, how am I going to get around this kid in this ever-expanding puddle of urine? And just then, a herd of people came out of the exit, so I grabbed the door and I slipped in behind them. Now, it was like 10-15 minutes early, and I was afraid that the managers saw me. They'd asked me to punch in early and mop up the pee. So I stayed low and I snuck my way through the hordes of humanity and into the bathroom, and I locked myself in the stall. My first day working in the grocery business, I hid in the toilet. And I had my Casio watch, and I'm keeping an eye on the little red numbers, and as soon as it's time to punch in, I ran outside and grabbed my time card, and I'm about to punch in, and this other box boy walks up, and he has a mop and a bucket, and he says, he's furious, and he says, these people are animals! I can't believe it. I just had to mop up some kid's pee. And he's got the mop and bucket. He shoves it into the corner and he yells, "That's it, I quit." And he takes off. He just walked out the door. If I was smart, I would have followed him. And I didn't know it, but that day turned out to be the high point of my 9-year career working in the grocery business. They started moving me up fairly quickly. And promoting me and giving me more hours and paying me more money. And pretty soon I was working too much to keep up with my classes. So I figured, okay, I'll drop out of college, I'll work for a couple of years, save a bunch of money, and then use that money to finance my art career. What could possibly go wrong? So the 9 years go by, and I had become the highest paid grocery manager in all of Albertson's 450 stores. However, I had destroyed my back, I nearly had a nervous breakdown, and I had saved $0 because I am a financial genius. When I finally decided to leave the grocery business, I gave my 2-week notice, and I was just going to walk away. But my supervisor scheduled my last day to be on Sunday night, closing the store when almost nobody would be there, and had me working right up to the very last minute of my 2-week notice. He was a bit of a prankster and loved a good joke. And so I figured, okay, if you're going to lob the ball to me, I might as well swing at it. So I bought 50 pounds of confetti and 100 helium balloons. And after everybody was gone and the store was closed, I packed the safe. Our safe had 3 compartments, and I packed all 3 compartments full of confetti, and I filled all the cash registers full of confetti. And then I sprinkled confetti around the office and in all the desk drawers of the office. And I inflated the 100 helium balloons in the scan coordinator's office. So when she came in the morning and opened the door, the balloons floated out into the store. And then I walked away, and I never went back. My dad was upset that I'd left such a promising career in the grocery business. And he said, well, at least you've never been to prison. So that's enough about the grocery business. Let's go back to Disney. Animation was a lot of work, which is fine. I love working hard. But during the crunch time, we'd work 6 to 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. And the producers never wanted us to leave our desks. And we used to joke that the producers would give us caffeine IVs and catheters if the union would let them. Because in animation, the top of the food pyramid is caffeine. I used to tell people that you need 3 things to be an animator. You need pencils, paper, and coffee. One day, a coworker brought me a handful of dark chocolate-covered espresso beans. And I thought that sounded weird, but I tried one. And it was the perfect combination of bitter, sweet, and crunchy. And so she left the pile on my desk, and I started munching on these dark chocolate-covered espresso beans. And at some point I realized that my vision was blurring. And then I noticed that my hands were flitting around like hummingbirds. And I stood at my desk, and I sat at my desk, I stood at my desk, I ran to the bathroom, I ran back to the desk, I ran back to the bathroom, I ran back to the desk, and then I yelled at my boss. It turned out to be okay. She was the one who had given me the dark chocolate covered espresso beans, and she was doing some spinning of her own. But we were no longer allowed to eat dark chocolate covered espresso beans. Animation at Disney runs like an assembly line. Actually, it's all of animation runs like an assembly line. Animation is very expensive, so they need to make it as efficient as possible. And what that meant at Disney was that whatever crew we were on, that character would be the only character we would draw. And that meant that I drew nothing but Esmeralda for the Hunchback of Notre Dame for a year and a half. And by the end of that, I was praying that the writers would kill her off, which, as it turns out, is an HR violation. And I got to go to sensitivity training. When I went on to Hercules, I got on to the Zeus, Hera, and the Muses crew, which meant I had 7 characters. But I wanted to draw all the characters, and the backgrounds, and design the shots, and the sequence of the shots. And that job is called storyboarding. So animating taught me that I wanted to be a storyboard artist. And storyboarding taught me that I wanted to direct. And directing taught me that I wanted vodka. Every time Disney put out a call for storyboard artists, I would take the test. I even took the test when they weren't looking for storyboard artists. But Disney had a way of pigeonholing its artist. Once an assistant animator, always an assistant animator. Or at least that was the lie we told ourselves. The truth was, at the time, I had a lot of gaps in my drawing skills. So I quit Disney and went back to college. But this time I focused on drawing the human body. Because animation, a lot of people think, is all about drawing cute characters with rubbery arms, and there's some of that. But mostly it's about understanding anatomy and being able to draw a person with volume that looks realistic and has emotion and movement. And that means that you sit in front of a naked person, naked people, yay, and you draw them. And I did that 49 hours a week for about 6 months. And that's when I really got good. And so it was about a year of taking classes that I got back into animation, and I worked on Curious George and Stuart Little and King of the Hill and Scooby-Doo. And my final gig was working at Netflix on F is for Family, which was Bill Burr's animated show that went for 5 seasons. And for those of you who don't know who Bill Burr is, he's a comedian who does stand-up specials for Netflix. And he's very funny and very controversial. Now, the first season of F is for Family had been a train wreck. I didn't work on that season. And that's why it was a train wreck. And so they wanted to hire me for season 2 to help, fix things, smooth out the rough edges. I already had a job. And so I didn't want this job. And it was a non-union gig, which meant they wouldn't be paying for my medical benefits or my retirement, my pension. And the studio was in Hollywood, and I lived in San Fernando, which meant I'd have to drive through the Cahuenga Pass every day, which on a good day was the bottleneck from hell. But if anything was happening at the Hollywood Bowl, traffic would just stop. And we'd sit there for hours. It was horrible. And I knew this. And Hollywood sounds romantic, working in Hollywood. And maybe it was romantic 100 years ago. But nowadays it's nothing but a toxic mix of tourists and homeless people and Scientologists. And I'm sorry if you're a homeless Scientologist tourist. Didn't mean to offend you. Maybe a little. But every time I would bring up one of these objections, they would just offer me more money. It was barbaric. So I took the job, and season 2 of F is for Family was the job from hell in the city from hell with the commute from hell. Season 3 was a little better, very little better. Season 4 turned into my dream job. We're able to get the right people and the right production companies in place, and I only had to work a couple of weekends of overtime. Between season 4 and season 5, COVID struck. Have you heard of COVID? It was horrible. People lost their jobs, people lost their lives, people lost their minds. But in animation, we're all working from home as if nothing had happened. Excuse me. Except that we didn't have the commute, we didn't have to wear pants, we didn't even have to bathe. My girlfriend loved that. And even though I missed the camaraderie of the other artists and the smell of pee in the streets of Hollywood, we had time. Time I could return to painting. And I always had projects going on, painting, whatever, in between gigs or on hiatus or when it was slow between during jobs, productions. And so this time it meant that I started painting portraits. And I focused on emotion and movement because movement is life. And so I wanted to bring as much life to these still images as I could. And so I did this painting and I spent an entire week on it. And at the end I thought, oh my God, this is genius. This should replace the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. And then I watched this YouTube video by this artist named John Lariva. And he painted a portrait in about an hour and a half that was 100 times better than the one I just spent a week on. And I was furious. And so I plotted his murder. And I started painting a portrait a day. So whatever that looked like, 3 hours or 6 hours, at the end of the day I just put down my brush, and the next day I started on a different portrait. Well, the first 100 portraits I did this way I had to burn, they were so bad. The second 100 portraits were better, and I ended up keeping some of those. Around the 200 portrait mark was when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I started seeing all these images of refugees on the internet. And I started painting them. Now, my process is to find a compelling image with a compelling emotion, and I identify the emotion I want to portray. Then I feel that emotion while I paint that emotion. So I was doing that with the refugees, and you know, a lot of them were children. A lot of them had that 1,000-mile stare that people get when the events swirling around them exhaust their minds. And this really started dragging me down. And I've never been in a war situation. I've never even been homeless. So it was difficult to access those emotions, but I did the best I could. And I became very depressed and very angry. So I had to start mixing in happier children. And you know, children are resilient. Their world pushes them down, and then they see another child, and they play and run around and laugh. And I started thinking of these children, these paintings of happy children, as the eyes of hope. And I started thinking of the paintings of happy children, or sad children, as the eyes of war. And after I painted like 100, well, it was actually like 140. I had to burn about 30 of those. I decided to put on a fundraiser to raise funds for aid efforts in Ukraine. And that fundraiser was in August of 2023, and I was able to sell 45 of my paintings to raise funds for aid efforts in Ukraine. I hope that my paintings and my stories have changed the way you feel and changed the way you think about the world around you, in the hopes that you've learned something about yourself. You can see more of my art other than just this, which looks like it's done drawing. Or you could go to my website, richwilkie.com, and I sell prints, and I sell originals, and I sell commissions. So I could paint your family, or your friends, or your enemies, or I could paint you younger, thinner, and smarter. If you'd like to sign up for my email list, I will be happy to keep you up to date. And this is the actual painting that you just watched dry. And what we're going to do now is auction this off. So a portion of the proceeds from the sale of this painting will go into my pocket. And a portion will go to the proprietor of this establishment so that I can continue to use the restroom. And a portion will go to a charity. Now I have a group of charities you can choose from, or you can pick a charity of your choice. I only ask that it's not something gratuitous like the Billionaire Boys Club. Anyways, thank you for coming. Please tell your friends to tell their friends about my art.